At 6, NHS leaders warn that the strain on the health service this winter is unsustainable. Almost 6 million people are now waiting for routine hospital treatment in England, and ambulance services are under pressure with a record number of 999 calls last month.
Things are already very, very difficult in the health service. It is compromising patient safety. It is compromising quality of service.
Also on the programme tonight, more turmoil at Yorkshire Cricket Club over Azim Rafiq's racism allegations. England's Joe Root speaks out and another boss resigns.
Today we have closed the book on apartheid.
South Africa's former president, F.W. de Klerk, the last white man to lead the country, has died at the age of 85. Buckingham Palace confirms the Queen will be at the Cenotaph on Sunday as the nation falls silent to mark Armistice Day. And the man who spent lockdown sorting out an old box of dinosaur bones and discovered a new species.
And coming up on the BBC News channel, Aston Villa announced Steven Gerrard as their new manager. The former Liverpool captain leaves Rangers after guiding them to their first league title in a decade.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. Almost 6 million people are now waiting for routine hospital treatment in England, the highest level since records began. The head of the NHS Confederation has warned that unprecedented demand could compromise patient safety, with the ambulance service in particular coming under extreme pressure. 5.83 million people in England are now waiting to start treatment on the NHS, the highest number since records began nearly 15 years ago. The ambulance service is under its highest state of alert. Latest figures show the average response time for urgent calls like heart attacks and strokes is nearly 54 minutes. The target is 18. Last month, more than 1,999,000 calls were answered in England, a record number. It's a picture being reflected across the rest of the UK too. Governments in all 4 UK nations say they are aware of the challenges and are doing their best to support services. Here's our health correspondent, Sophie Hutchinson.
Across the length and the breadth of the UK, ambulances are queuing, unable to hand over the sick and injured patients they have on board because hospitals have no room. And ambulances stuck in queues aren't available to attend other emergencies, leaving patients in need waiting at home.
I called an ambulance at 11:50 and they said that they were going to send help ASAP.
2 weeks ago, Christina called 999 when she found her grandma, Margaret, slumped in a chair having a stroke. But after waiting 3.5 hours, she called again to ask when the ambulance would arrive.
They explained to me that she was already down for a blue light ambulance from the first call. They had nothing available at that time and they couldn't give me a time of when they were going to be able to get to me. And then they arrived at 5:30 a.m.
Her grandma then queued for 3 hours outside hospital, taking her wait for care to around 9 hours, which meant she was out of time to receive medication to reverse the damage done by the stroke. And older people are facing devastating delays in northwest England, according to this paramedic, who asked to remain anonymous.
I've been out to people who've been on the floor for an excess of 20 hours, and we've just not had the resource to go to them. And that's not because we don't care, it's just because we physically haven't got anybody to go.
Do you think people are losing their lives because of the delays at the moment?
Absolutely. We know of stories of people dying in the back of ambulances where we've not been able to offload at hospitals. We've got experiences of going out to people who, if we'd have got to them a little bit quicker, we could have started treatment and potentially the outcome could have been different.
North West Ambulance Service has said it's increasing the numbers of available ambulances and taking on additional staff in its 999 call centres. All 14 ambulance services in the UK have escalated to the highest level of alert, and some have even gone beyond, like South Central, which recently declared a critical incident when managers said the service became unsafe. For the last 3 months, these handlers have answered an additional 21,000 999 calls compared to 2 years ago. And just before the critical incident was declared here, instead of having an average of 20 patients waiting for an ambulance, they had 120 patients waiting.
And have you got the pain in the chest at the moment?
South Central has now asked the government for military support. Armed forces have helped ambulance services in other parts of England, Wales and Scotland and have supported hospitals in Northern Ireland. And hospitals are also under immense pressure in other parts of the UK, with record waits for non-urgent treatment.
Things are already very, very difficult in the health service. It is compromising patient safety. It is compromising quality of service.
We've put extra funding in, £5.4 billion, for this winter period, just to basically help with the processes, help to get extra staff in, and also help more ambulance staff. But of course, it's difficult to do that at short notice.
Governments in all parts of the UK say they're aware of the challenges and are doing their best to support ambulance services. But with winter coming, the pressure is likely only to get worse.
Sophie is with me now. There's a great deal of concern from both patients and from doctors. What can be done, though?
Well, there is this huge concern. I think many people I've spoken to who work in the NHS say they're extremely worried about what's going to happen over the next few months. In fact, one woman told me that she was dreading it. The NHS isn't just facing a busy time, it is facing pressure like never before. Many people have never seen pressure like this in their entire careers. There's been a huge rise in demand. 999 calls are up by over a quarter from 2 years ago, and we've just seen the busiest October ever in A&E. And we're only in November. The winter is notoriously the most difficult time for the NHS, with January really being the pinnacle of that. And what the solution is, well, the military, we've seen they've helped out. They're able to drive ambulances, for example, and support staff. NHS staff are also being asked to take on additional shifts, but many of them are exhausted. And what the NHS really needs at the moment are additional staff, doctors, nurses and paramedics to fill those shifts. But they take years to train, and so there are no easy solutions.
Sophie Hutchinson, thank you. Well, the government's latest coronavirus figures for the UK show there were almost 42,500 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means on average there were 34,600 new cases reported per day in the last week. 195 deaths were reported. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive test. On average, in the past week, 163 related deaths were reported every day. And more than 11.4 million people have now received their booster jab. The Chief Executive of Yorkshire County Cricket Club, Mark Arthur, has become the latest senior figure to resign in response to the row over racism engulfing the club. Earlier, the former Yorkshire cricket captain, Azim Rafiq, who's made allegations of racism at the club, said he's incredibly hurt after the England Test captain and Yorkshire player Joe Root said he couldn't recall ever witnessing racism at the club. Our sports editor, Dan Roan, reports.
He's trying to prepare to lead his side into the Ashes next month, but even here in Australia, Joe Root can't avoid the crisis that has engulfed his county side. A report found his former Yorkshire teammate Azim Rafiq was a victim of racial harassment and bullying at the club. But addressing the issue for the first time, England's captain today insisted he could not recall any racist behaviour there.
Not that I can recall, no. No, I can't. But the thing is, what I will say is that it's clear that things have happened at the club, and we have to make sure that we eradicate it, and we look to find ways of making sure that this never happens again in the sport and beyond that as well within society.
But those comments dismayed Rafiq, who an hour later tweeted, "Disappointed is not even the feeling, incredibly hurt, but uncomfortable truths are hard to accept, it seems." Having sparked outrage for failing to take disciplinary action against any member of staff, Yorkshire has lost sponsors, the right to host international cricket at Headingley, and is now embroiled in further investigations after more allegations. Root admitting the scandal at the club, at which he's spent his entire career, had fractured the game.
That is obviously deeply hurtful that it's happened at a club that I'm so close to, and it means so much for me to go and play for Yorkshire. It's really important that we recognise what has happened. We make sure that moving forward, we never see this happen again. We've got to find a way of confronting this and stopping it, and making sure that absolutely we are getting rid of racism from society.
Tonight, another Yorkshire board member, Chief Executive Mark Arthur, whose resignation Rafiq had demanded, became the latest in a host of senior figures at the club to step down as the fallout continued. Having risen through the academy ranks here at Yorkshire alongside Rafiq, the England captain himself has now become the latest high-profile cricketer to be drawn into this controversy. And with Rafiq due to give evidence at what promises to be an explosive parliamentary committee hearing next week, this crisis is far from over. Dan Rowan, BBC News, Headingley.
Economic recovery from the pandemic slowed sharply over the summer, with supply chain problems hampering growth. New figures from the Office for National Statistics show the UK's economy grew by 1.3%, less than many analysts had expected. Here's our economics editor, Faisal Islam.
Polishing metal in the Midlands, this West Bromwich manufacturer can see the growth in the economy since the depths of the pandemic lockdown. But some of the shine is now coming off.
We've seen month-on-month growth. We did see in August and early part of September that it dropped slightly, but a lot of that was because our customers physically couldn't get hold of the material. It was stuck at ports, it couldn't come into the UK to be processed. Now that's all since come in, causing bottlenecks in production.
And that is exactly what's seen in the big economic numbers too. The pandemic rebound beginning to fade, with normal service not quite resuming.
We're on the right path, but of course there are global challenges ahead, and that's why the budget set out a plan to build a stronger economy with support for working families at its heart.
But the net result of that, say the Bank of England, is 2 years of declining living standards after inflation and after tax. So that includes all the measures that you have mentioned.
Yeah, well, what it doesn't include is the spending on public services, and that does bring value to people's lives.
So the UK is finally emerging from the economic heart attack of 2020, but growth is now a little slower than was hoped. In the last quarter, the economy expanded by 1.3%, and forecasts predict a further slowing of growth in the coming months. The rebound from the pandemic continued, partly thanks to the vaccine rollout. But we are in a new phase now, with higher prices and taxes hitting people's pay packets and the supply chain crisis continuing to affect what businesses can manufacture. There are risks ahead from around the world and closer to home too. The UK and EU have continued arguments about the Brexit deal, with the government here suggesting it might end the special Northern Ireland trade border by triggering what is known as Article 16, and some EU voices in turn suggesting a suspension of the whole Brexit agreement.
When you're trying to deal with a cost of living crisis, why would you get involved in any way with some sort of trade war with our biggest trading partner?
We are not at that point, and what we should be doing and what we are doing is working constructively with our European friends and partners to explore every opportunity that we have to try and resolve some of our differences around the operation of that protocol.
Back in West Brom, it is stability on trade and some sort of normality that this exporter is yearning for. The rebound may be ending, but the economy is yet to settle. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
The head of the United Nations has described tackling climate change as the world's most important fight, as he urged nations at the COP26 summit in Glasgow not to make hollow promises. Antonio Guterres said governments need to pick up the pace and show ambition, with the summit due to end tomorrow. From Glasgow, here's our science editor, David Shookman.
The end game of the conference, urgent consultations with governments back home, checking the agreement line by line, assessing every word. The warnings about rising temperatures are clear, but national interests are at stake, so the talks go on.
We are not there yet on the most critical issues. There is still a lot more work to be done, and COP26 is scheduled to close at the end of tomorrow. So time is running out. We still have a monumental challenge ahead of us.
There's been a boost from China, the world's biggest polluter, and America, the second biggest, that they'll work together. The latest in a flurry of initiatives here. A plan to cut methane, a potent greenhouse gas, though some important countries aren't taking part. A promise to end deforestation by 2030, but we have heard this kind of thing before. And a call to end the use of coal, the dirtiest fossil fuel, but what matters is getting agreements that governments can't wriggle out of. So in this final stretch, what are the big arguments that still need to be settled? Well, the first is how often countries should update their plans for going green. Some say that's needed every year, others say that's too often. Then there's the fundamental question of cutting the gases that are heating the planet. They're still heading up when the science couldn't be clearer that they've got to be falling fast. And then aid for the poorest nations. They were promised it more than a decade ago. It still hasn't been delivered.
It's a relief that people are recognising that we need to help communities on the front lines of the climate crisis, but it's a frustration that rich governments aren't yet doing what it takes to help them out.
Even now?
Even now. They hear the sounds, they're putting fine words on paper, but no real mechanism to address this crisis.
And as a reminder of what this is all about, torrential rain struck the Indian city of Chennai, floods spilling into a hospital. Scientists have long warned that even more violent extremes are possible, but acting now could head them off. So some countries want to move away from fossil fuels entirely. The UK and many others say it's not the right time. Another example of different perspectives in these last hours. David Shuckman, BBC News in Glasgow.
The time is just after 6:15, our top story this evening. NHS leaders warn the strain on the health service in England this winter is unsustainable, with ambulance services dealing with a record number of 999 calls.
And coming up in the next few minutes, we'll be live here on the Isle of Wight, where they've just discovered a brand new species of dinosaur.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News channel, we'll have more on the fallout from the Yorkshire cricket racism scandal, as England captain Gerrard says it's fractured the game and torn lives apart.
Buckingham Palace has confirmed that the Queen will attend the Remembrance Sunday service at the Cenotaph this weekend, 3 weeks after she was told to rest by doctors. Today, Armistice Day has been marked across the UK as people fell silent at 11 o'clock this morning to remember those who have lost their lives in conflict. Ceremonies were disrupted last year by COVID restrictions. Sarah Campbell reports.
On the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, the guns of the First World War fell silent. More than a century later, the nation paused to remember those who sacrificed so much in service to their country. Last year, the pandemic prevented people from coming together to remember. Not so this year. Sydney, Australia, on November the 11th. It's also France's National Day of Remembrance. So many lives were cut short in French fields. Many soldiers never returned home. Walter Tull was one of them. Britain's first black army officer, he was killed in 1918. Today, at the Cenotaph in London, his great-nephew laid a wreath in his honour.
This is a fantastic event to come to the point where I'm able to lay a wreath on behalf of my granduncle at the Cenotaph. Is a great honour and a great honour to him.
Armistice Day, ensuring those who were lost are not forgotten. Sarah Campbell, BBC News.
The former president of South Africa, F.W. de Klerk, the last white person to lead the country, has died at the age of 85. He was a key figure in the country's transition to democracy and in the release of Nelson Mandela from prison in 1990. As Andrew Harding reports, Mr. de Klerk recorded a last message to the South African people with instructions to broadcast it after his death.
We did not only admit the wrongness of apartheid.
F.W. de Klerk was terminally ill when he recorded this farewell message, still wrestling with his place in South Africa's tortured history.
I, without qualification, apologise for the pain and the hurt and the indignity and the damage that apartheid has done.
In the late 1980s, South Africa stood on the brink of chaos. The security forces of a racist white government were battling against the black majority. No one expected much to change when de Klerk took over as president. After all, his government ran a nation where black people were treated by law as subordinate, inferior.
The prohibition of the African National Congress.
But within months, de Klerk announced a shocking U-turn.
The number of subsidiary organizations is being rescinded.
The ANC, the outlawed liberation party of Nelson Mandela, was unbanned, and soon after that, Mandela himself was released from prison after 27 years. Soon the two men, once bitter enemies, were sharing the Nobel Peace Prize as South Africa inched towards democracy.
What nobody can take away from him is his foresight. He seized the moment, he showed the courage, and he was the figure that eventually saw the end of apartheid and Nelson Mandela elected as president in those heady days of the new rainbow democracy.
But the transition was not peaceful. Thousands of black South Africans died during political violence that was, it turned out, deliberately stirred up by white security forces. Still, de Klerk and Mandela kept negotiating, nudging their nation forward. Not that they were ever close.
So help me God.
And then in 1994, history was made, as Mandela was sworn in as democratic South Africa's first president. De Klerk retreated backstage.
The question that has always stalked F.W. de Klerk is a simple one. Was he a good man who did all he could to destroy an evil system? Or was he an opportunist, someone who never properly confronted his own role in the horrors of racial apartheid? Many today here are choosing to focus on his undeniable achievements.
He had the courage to step away from the path that his party that he led had embarked upon from 1948, and we will remember him for that.
De Klerk will always be a divisive figure, but history will record that he helped to bring freedom to South Africa.
The former South African president, F.W. de Klerk, who has died at the age of 85. 3 MPs from the SNP and Labour have been accused of getting drunk on a flight to visit UK troops in Gibraltar. The BBC understands that the Ministry of Defence was told of their behaviour by military chaperones on the flight. But tonight, Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said the accusations about 2 of her MPs were false. Our political correspondent, Chris Mason, is at Westminster. What more do we know, Chris?
Yeah, so 15 MPs, Sophie, went out the other day to Gibraltar as part of a scheme to allow MPs to better understand how the armed forces work. And as you say, there were 2 military chaperones on the plane with them who were sufficiently concerned about their drinking and their behaviour that they reported that behaviour back to their bosses at the Ministry of Defence. In addition to that, we've spoken to a witness who says that these 3 MPs were drinking in the airport lounge beforehand, were drinking on the plane and were drunk by the time the plane got to Gibraltar. So now one of those MPs is Labour's Charlotte Nichols. She returned very quickly from the trip, came straight back to the UK. She does have mental health concerns. She had had a mental health episode, I'm told. She has post-traumatic stress disorder and is on heavy medication. What then of the 2 SNP MPs? These are Drew Henry and David Linden. Really strong pushback from them and from Scotland's First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, Nicola Sturgeon says it was a pretty disgraceful attempt by the Conservatives this to try and distract attention from the behaviour of Conservative MPs that we've been reporting in the last week or so. That despite the accounts of these witnesses. Incidentally, they've not denied drinking, they've just denied being drunk. Tonight, the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has written to the leaders of the SNP at Labour at Westminster and indeed to the Commons Speaker, saying their behaviour and their drinking was unacceptable and mustn't happen again.
Chris Mason, thank you. The husband of the detained British-Iranian woman Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe says he is stuck in the same status quo after meeting officials at the Foreign Office. Richard Ratcliffe, who is on day 19 of a hunger strike, said the meeting had been quite depressing, giving him no new hope that she will be released. Nazanin was arrested in Iran in 2016. A student has been found guilty of murdering his step-grandmother in a house fire. 21-year-old Tiernan Darnton confessed he had killed her during a game of Truth or Dare. Mary Gregory, who was 94, died from smoke inhalation following the fire in her home in Heysham in Lancashire in 2018. The former Liverpool and England football player Steven Gerrard has been named as the new manager of Aston Villa. He's leaving Rangers after 3 years, having helped them win the Scottish Premiership title last year. And finally, to a retired GP who started lockdown with an old box of dinosaur bones and came out of lockdown having discovered a new species of dinosaur, one that roamed the Isle of Wight 125 million years ago. It's an extraordinary story that takes lockdown hobbies to a whole new level. Well, Duncan Kennedy is on the Isle of Wight to tell us more. Duncan.
Well, Sophie, they've been finding dinosaurs here on the Isle of Wight for around 200 years. The dinosaurs they do discover are about 125 million years old. They thought there were 2 main species of dinosaur, until now.
Gnarled, knobbly, and what a nose. This is how the not very dainty dino would have looked like. And the USP of this VIP, its bulbous snout.
And here we have vertebra or backbone of...
Its remains had spent 40 years in old boxes until Jeremy Lockwood, a retired GP, went through them. He'd always believed there had to be more than 2 types of dinosaur on the island. And he was right.
I took a bone which was a nasal bone, and I thought I'm going to try and reconstruct what the skull of this animal looked like. So I sort of put it into life position, and I thought, goodness me, this has got a bulbous end to the end of its nose. So it became obvious that this was something completely different.
It took Dr. Lockwood 2 years to sift through all the bones, and his new species has now been confirmed by experts.
Just along here, it's where I found it all them years ago.
That's right, Keith Simmons is the one who found the dinosaur near a village called Bryston, which is why it's been called Brystonius simmonsii. It was in 1978 Keith discovered the bones, and now the new species has been confirmed. He's delighted.
It's nice, yeah, it's a bit of recognition for the work done over the years. It's ideal.
And now you found out you found a new species of dinosaur. What do you make of that?
Something for the history books, really. And, yeah, it's very good.
This coast was already known as a world-class centre for discovering dinosaurs. It seems some have, well, just got a nose for it. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News, on the Isle of Wight.
Time now for a look at the weather. Nick Miller is here. Hello.
Hi there. Plenty of sunshine in the Channel Islands today, but it's the cloud that was across many places, and it's the cloud and a chance of rain that's going to win out as we get into tomorrow. And the reason for that is that low pressure is moving into the UK. Will move right across us tomorrow, and already we're seeing some outbreaks of rain into Northern Ireland and parts of Scotland. The wind is picking up into western areas as well. And this evening tonight we'll continue with some occasional rain for Northern Ireland, for Scotland, into northwest England as well. This little narrow area of rain will move through Wales into the Midlands and parts of southern England as the night goes on, and the breeze will pick up across all areas on what's going to be another mild night. So we start the day tomorrow at around 11 degrees in Manchester and Belfast. The low pressure will move right across Scotland tomorrow. This is where we'll see a longer spell of rain. Elsewhere, some showery rain for Northern Ireland, for Northern England, for Wales. For the Midlands, Eastern and Southern England, here, well, there's a splash of rain in the morning. Then it tries to brighten up for a time, but there's a chance of a shower again as the day goes on. Though the further south you are, barely any rain in southernmost counties of England. Now the winds will be picking up. These are average speeds. Around Irish Sea coast, we're talking some gusts of 40 to 50 miles an hour. That wind direction, though, is a mild one, so we're topping out at around 14 or 15 degrees. And it's for southern Scotland, for Wales and England. Still the chance for some showery rain as we go on through tomorrow evening as the low pressure begins to move out into the North Sea and then replaced into the weekend with this bulging ridge of high pressure coming in. So things are going to be settling down. It'll be turning drier. So the outlook for the weekend then brings a lot of dry weather, bar the chance for the odd shower around. It will be mild. The winds will be easing. Some rain though into northern Scotland on Sunday. A lot of cloud around. Not necessarily all the time, but sunshine really will be a Brucey bonus this weekend. Sophie.
Nick, thank you. And that is all from the BBC News at 6. It's goodbye from me on BBC One. We join the BBC's news teams where you are. Goodbye.